Hey, welcome back to the Keys History and Discovery Center. We're here for our Tuesday morning look at the facility, and we're going to talk a little bit about Captain Ben Baker today. When Jill was just showing you a picture of him, was born in Bahamas in 1818 and became what was affectionately known as King of the Florida Wreckers. He's described in a book, Key West Then and Now, as tall, gaunt, shrill-voiced, hawk-nosed, and he was really an interesting history that ties Key West and the Upper Keys together. He moved from the Bahamas with his wife and some of their children to Key West in the 1840s, early 1840s. In 1850, he was in the U.S. Census, a 32-year-old mariner living on the corner of Whitehead and Caroline Streets, running the Ben Baker Wrecking Company aboard his 13-ton, three-masted schooner, the Rapid. Now, what is interesting about Ben Baker, other than the fact that he was so prolific out on the seas, and when he would talk to his children and his grandchildren about how he could find all these wrecks, he would tell them, "We wreckers can smell them." I'm not sure if that was his real voice. Apparently it was shrill voice, so that was kind of deep. But he has an interesting history in the Florida Keys because wrecking was not a full-time job. And just to kind of go back on wrecking is sometimes kind of compared to piracy. They were really very separate jobs. Pirates who would roam the Florida Reef would stop at a wreck, take what they want, do what they want, and not, be held accountable for anything. Wrecking, on the other hand, was a licensed business. You didn't just sail up on a ship and start taking over. You would sail up on a ship. You would present your license to the master of the ship that was stuck on the reef, and you would say, "Hey, I'm Ben Baker. I'm here to help you. Would you like my assistance?" And at that point, the master of the wrecked ship would either say yes or no, depending on how desperate their need was. Often, the master of the wrecked ship would try to do their own efforts to get off the reef, and sometimes all it took was high tide to come in. Other times was a much more needed to happen, so they needed outside help. But the first wrecker to arrive on scene was known as the wreck master, and it was very beneficial to be the wreck master because he was the one who set the rules. Distracted by my boss, 1 second. He would set the rules. He would decide how many wrecking crews would assist in the operation, and he also got to decide who worked and who didn't. So, for instance, if me and 5 other wrecking captains are playing poker on Thursday night, and I catch a couple of other guys cheating that night, and then the next morning we all end up at a wreck site, and I'm the first captain out there who becomes the wreck master. I get to decide who gets to work and who doesn't, and if I think you cheated me the night before, then I'm pretty sure you got the day off. But wrecking was not a full-time job, so a lot of these wreckers had side gigs, fishing, turtling, and what Baker did was he became a pineapple farmer. And what a lot of people don't realize about the Florida Keys, and especially the Upper Keys, is in the 1800s, mid to late 1800s, even towards the turn of the century, these were farming communities. And Ben Baker became one of the first to have a pineapple plantation on Key Largo. What he did is he sailed to Cuba. He bought 6,000 pineapple slips and suckers, baby pineapples, brought them to Key Largo with his sons, and they cleared about 20 acres, or they cleared, he had a homestead, 160 acres, about mile marker 97, bay to ocean. And they cleared a bunch of land, they planted the pineapples, and then they grew, and they would, this would become his job. And it was interesting about pineapples, you think of pineapples as being a side gig, but in 1870, Ben Baker sold $7,000 worth of pineapples from his crop that summer. And to equate that with in modern day money, that's $150,000, $180,000. That's a pretty good deal. Ben Baker would couple interesting notes about Ben Baker. In 1870, he was taking a load up of his fruits up to New York, and he actually saw the Brooklyn Bridge being constructed in 1870. 1870 was also the year that Alligator Reef Lighthouse began construction. And Ben Baker was also the first person to open a post office on Key Largo. In 1870, he opened a post office on Cayo Largo, which was the name in 1870, and he was servicing about a dozen families. It was a short-lived, about a year operation. And now, one of the disadvantages to having a sailing operation as opposed to a train operation, which Henry Flagler brought in, when they would pick their pineapples, they would have to pick them green, stow them in their boat, and then sail them up to the markets on the East Coast. And sometimes if there was too much wind, if there was not enough wind, the ship would get maybe stuck out on sea, and they would lose on average about 25% of their crop. But at least in one instance, Ben Baker lost. There was no wind and lost the entire crop. So that was the whole season's work, down the drains. When Ben Baker died in 1889, their family broke apart a skiff they had on property, which was made of yellow pine. They made a casket, and they lined the casket from a roll of brown fabric that his wife and others had used to make underwear for the family. But they lined the casket, and they put the casket aboard the Rapid to sail it back down to Key West to be buried. But there was no wind that day, so they had to come back to Key Largo, and Ben Baker was buried on Key Largo. And even as late as the 1900s, early 1900s, his gravestone could still be seen on the property. It has long since disappeared. And what is the last kind of interesting tidbit about Ben Baker is in the last year or two, maybe a little longer, Baker's Cay, a new resort, opened up on Key Largo. And it took me a while to put these two things together, but Baker's Cay was named after Captain Ben Baker. And I want to say hello to 10-year-old Tony, if you're out there watching today. I hope you are. You and your mom have been watching every time we do one of these, and we appreciate your enthusiasm. We'll be back here on Thursday at 10 o'clock talking about another piece of Florida Keys history that we have here at the Keys History and Discovery Center. And I hope you guys are staying safe and not going too stir crazy. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again in a couple days. Bye-bye.